And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how we learn about this Mexican tradition at school. So I'm gonna give you the run of, the whole thing. Well, to start, we were taught about this celebration that the indigenous peoples of the land before the Spaniards came over had a celebration of the dead during this approximate season. And when the Spanish conquistadors and later the colonialists came over, they meant to stamp out the gruesome celebrations because, they involved sacrifices. I'm pretty sure everyone knows a little bit about Aztec sacrifices. So they meant to stamp them out with a Catholic veneer of saintly celebrations. And so this gives rise to a syncretic tradition that blends the indigenous celebrations and the indigenous ideas with Christian values and Catholic worldview, which, doesn't make sense because Mexico doesn't have one indigenous culture. We have at least 63 indigenous languages and more cultures. So, there's this monolithic idea of Spanish and one indigenous culture. It just, doesn't add up to the narrative. But let's continue on the same idea. So basically what we have here, November 1st has been interpreted as the day that the souls of children visit their relatives, while the 2nd of November is the day that adults come and visit over. And as you can see here in the images, even though it's in Spanish, other dates have been added by certain communities to reflect other beliefs within the same celebration. It's like extending the celebration, So, for example, some people say that on October 28th, the people who died by accidents are the ones who come and visit the altar. And then the souls of purgatory, if you're Catholic, are the ones who visit on October 29th. And non-baptized babies have the chance to come over at October 30th and 31st, and so on and so forth. It's just the lore expands, basically. And it's worth noting that even though there's a lot of Catholic imagery, over time, the holiday has become more of a secular tradition with the religious overtones than a religious holiday in itself. And that happens a lot with Mexico as a culture in general. But particularly, this is a case with Dia de Muertos here in Mexico, so much so that you can find, it's ubiquitous, you can find Dia de Muertos altar contests in secular public schools and in government-sponsored cultural events. So it's more a cultural thing than a religious thing, even if you see, huge crosses. And because if this celebration were still religious, we couldn't learn about it in schools and we couldn't celebrate it publicly as a cultural affair, backed by the Ministry of Culture, because our Constitution establishes a secular state and guarantees secular public education. So that's just to give you an idea of how it's been pretty much stripped down to say, okay, so how do we celebrate this? This is a picture of me many moons ago at school, working on an altar. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the picture of the altar itself, but just to give you an idea, we're university students setting up an altar in a public school. So no religion there at all. So how do we celebrate this holiday? It all starts with setting up an altar for the dead. The idea here is that the altar is a spot when you honor your deceased relatives. And there's this hope, this tradition, this belief, literal or not, that the souls of your relatives will visit you for the holiday, be it that they're in heaven or in purgatory or whatever they may be, they're going to come visit. And that's the altar, put up for them so they can visit and be with you. And well, basically, it depends on regional costumes or like the meaning you wish to impart your altar with, or just the means available to you, basically. But an altar can showcase several levels. It can be a single level table, like the one up on the upper left. It can be a two-leveled altar, which stands for heaven and earth, 2 levels. It can also be a 3-leveled altar, which stands for heaven, earth, and purgatory, 3 levels. And it can go all the way up to 7 levels, which represents the 7 capital sins for Catholics. And, it can be anything in between 1 and 7 with no particular meaning, just, saying, oh, I wanted to put, 5, 5 levels or whatever. It also works. So you can have here an idea of how elaborate the altars can be, especially, in public spaces, as I said, schools or contests. It's really beautiful. And the smell is just amazing. That orange thing is a flower called cempasúchil, and the smell is just amazing. So I'll give you a couple of pictures more here so you can have an idea of the cultural impact of this. Basically, in contests, the idea is to have the most beautiful altar. So it's, go big or go home. And with paintings, with sculptures, it's really, really beautiful. So what do we have here? How do you make an altar for the dead? So first, you have to think about whom are you going to dedicate your altar to? Like, are you doing it for the whole deceased family? Are you doing it just, for your favorites? Are you doing it, for example, in schools and contests, as I mentioned, usually a particular famous character is chosen, like an actor or a singer, or in this case here that I'm showing you, apparently they made an altar for the heroes of independence because it looks like a museum of independence. So there you go, they made an altar for independence heroes. You just have to choose whom you're going to make it for, so you can tailor it to them, because again, think about it as you're making it for a deceased person, his soul, his spirit, he's still there. You're doing it for them. So now that you've done that, you can start setting the whole altar up. So first, usually you have to find a way to make steps, usually with boxes or whatever. You cover it up with maybe a tablecloth or something, and then you go over to how you decorate it. There's actually a lot of traditional decorations. This is just not, it's not like, oh, what are we going to decorate it with? Let's see what, no. There's usually like very traditional things. So that image is really awful. Okay, so let's stick with this one. So we can start with the 4 elements. They're usually represented in the altar. The fire element is represented with candles, and candles are understood to light the soul's way to your home, and when it's finished, back to their resting place. Then you also add glasses of water as an element, but also under the idea of quenching the thirst of the soul, after trekking from wherever to your house. Then there's, you can see at the steps, this paper, it's called papel picado. It's basically a craft made from very, very thin, we call it China paper. So it's a very specialized craft, and it represents, besides being colorful and pretty, it represents wind. It's a way to represent wind in an altar. And it also represents death, because some images are cut up to represent skulls and skeletons and whatnot. And to represent earth, we use traditional fruit, such as mandarin and sugarcane, which are typical for autumn here in Mexico. And so they're part of the altar as well. Now, other decorations that you can find are salt to purify the souls, copal incense, which is a type of incense, or just, incense in general, to protect the souls and your home from evil spirits that might want to, snatch a ride. And as I mentioned, cempasúchil flowers, which are the orange ones, you trace a pathway to the altar, So they can find the altar. And it also has a very pungent, beautiful perfume. So it's just part of the whole vibe. And you can also add pan de muerto. It's a bread that has the shape like bones. It's shaped like bones for food. And you add sugar skulls or chocolate skulls, and Catrina skeletons as well represent death. And there are other decorations that depend more on local traditions and interpretations. Like you can also find very flowery arches, or you can find even a soap and a towel, because the idea of the soul washing its hands before eating. So it just depends on your culture, basically. And something very important to set up in your altar is the traditional foods and alcoholic beverages of the people, like the favorite foods and drinks of the people who the altar is dedicated to. So, if they like mole, or if they liked enchiladas, or whatever they liked, the idea is to put it there, because the idea is that they're going to consume it. Now, there's also altars for children. If you're making an altar for children, make sure that you have toys as well, favorite toys. Or, so this was mine a few years back. Sorry about the terrible picture. But you can see there, I have the candles, I have some incense, I have cempasúchil flowers, I have papel picado paper, water, salt, that's pan de muerto, the bread in the center. And on the back, you can see a little like a table with an angel. That is a sugar confection called alfeñique. So it's a traditional craft in which figurines are made from sugar. It's a sugar paste that you turn it into a craft. And it's usually used for these dates in particular to make tiny little altars for children. And in this case, this altar, I was dedicating it to my baby brother, my unborn baby brother. So that's why it's a children's altar. And if you're doing an altar for adults, what I did, very simple. I just removed the children's part and added a pair of pictures to the people I was dedicating to, but the rest, stayed the same. If it were a religious altar, you would see Catholic crosses and maybe an image of purgatory to help the souls out of purgatory. Mine wasn't a Catholic one, so you're not going to see that. And well, at the top of the altar, be it here or be it here, you should add pictures of the people you're dedicating this to, so they know, oh, the altar is for me. Okay. And next to it, next to the pictures, usually you can also add a mirror, because the mirror is the idea that through the mirror, the dead person is going to be able to see itself and to see you, and that you will be able to see them, like see the soul through the mirror, so you can have contact with your dead relative. Not that it happens, but it's part of the tradition. So usually the altar is set up some days in advance, because as you can see, it's a lot of work. And usually the picture is added at the end when the celebration is started. And a festive family meal usually brings everyone near the altar, so the living might enjoy a meal once a year in company of these dead relatives. Before they return to whatever their resting place is at the end of the festivities. So for example, I can give you an example here. So that's my family, part of my family. And a very curious thing about this picture is that this picture, I'm not in the picture because I took the picture, and this was in Dia de Muertos, actually, like 11 years ago. And the lady on the left, the lady in pink, is my mother. This was Dia de Muertos 2013, and she died a week after the festivity. It's just, but it was really weird. But we had our celebration and everything. So traditionally, you will hear that it is important not to eat the food from the altar, because its essence is believed to be consumed by the dead. And so it's considered that they rob the food of its flavor, and it would be like spiritually dangerous for the living to consume it. But if you think it as a humanist, really what is happening here, it's guarding you against spoiled food. I mean, if you're leaving food out for how many days, it's going to spoil, don't eat it. But so many people still observe that costume, but as humanists, we might be interested in knowing that conversations are not being had about or around the idea of it's wasting food, which is, not okay. So how do we play around with that? So there's conversations still happening here in Mexico. Another thing that's quite traditional in many communities is to go visit the graves of the deceased people. They clean the graves, they decorate the graves. It's really beautiful. And really interesting, the grave itself becomes a substitute for the altar, and the people have their dinner at the graves, like not only in the cemetery, but at the grave to, share it with the dead person who's down there. That's the idea. And basically, we've had modern additions as well to the Day of the Dead. So basically, in one of the last James Bond movies, it was filmed in Mexico City, and they showcased a Day of the Day parade, which they absolutely made up, like it didn't exist before that movie. And now it was such a hit that it's become a tradition in Mexico City. So now it's a tradition of the Day of the Dead to have a parade in the capital when it didn't exist before. So that's how you create new traditions. And with all of this, well, this is basically me outlining the traditional practice of Day of the Dead. This is how I learned it, all through elementary school to high school, maybe even university. It's what you'll find in internet, wherever it's translated, you'll find it this way. But now I'm going to shake the whole thing up for you. Okay, so this lady here is Dr. Elsa Malvido from INA. INA is the National Institute of Anthropology and History. She already passed away recently, but she dedicated her life's work to research into the topic of Dia de Muertos culture in Mexico. And she did this work for 30, 40 years. And it turns out, according to her research, that everything I just told you about Mesoamericans and colonialists and the whole thing, none of it is true. None of it is true. So this is what she discovered. I'm going to tell you. Dia de Muertos is not an indigenous tradition handed down from ancient Mesoamericans syncretized with the Catholic colonial faith. Dia de Muertos, as we know it, it was completely made up by the Mexican intellectual elite of the revolution, which happened during the 1920s. So in the 1930s, as the war was coming to an end, it was a governmental and intellectual attempt to give Mexicans a national identity and national unity, because they were broken by being ravaged by a 10-year war that broke after a long dictatorship of 30 years. So we have a dictatorship for 30 years, then 10 years of a war, and then a government that is trying to reconstruct the whole society. And they made all of this up to give us an identity and national unity. So how does something like that happen? A lot of things happen that built up to Dia de Muertos. So first, we're gonna go like thousands of years back. It turns out that ancient Romans set up altars for the dead, and this got incorporated into medieval European Catholic culture. So from Roman, it became Catholic, right? Then let's set that apart. Then we have in 19th century Mexico, a new type of poetry was created. They're called well, they were called panteones, which means cemeteries. So the poetry was called cemeteries. And now they're called calaveras literarias, which means literary skeletons. So again, poetry, but it's called literary skeleton. They started as satirical political writings in verse. So you basically want to mock a politician, you write a poem about him, right? And now, like 100 years later, they have become poetry contests. You have them in schools, you have them everywhere. So these poems speak about public figures. It could be your SHJ celebrant Martin. It could be your teacher. It could be whomever you want, but a public figure. And in these poems, it's the story about how the public figure is taken by the Grim Reaper to their death. But you have to make it poetical, you have to make it rhyme, you have to make it funny, you have to make references to the person, to the politics, to the culture. It's a whole thing. And just so you know, it's considered an honor to be mocked in such poems. It's not an insult. It's actually an honor. And the most original ones, because they're usually contests, the most original ones with the best rhymes and the best cultural references are the ones that win these contests. So just to back up a little bit, you've got the Roman that turned into something Catholic. You have these poems. And then around the time of the revolution that I mentioned, the 1910s and the 1920s, an artist called Posadas created a very famous image. Let me see. There you go. A very famous character. That character there is called Katrina. That's just, she's basically death personified. She's a skeleton. She created this Katrina as a way to mock the richer classes who thought themselves as being European because they brought all of the French fashions and the whole thing. So, this was a satirical piece, just mocking at rich people, saying, yes, you dress up with the best French fashions, but you're all going to die, basically. And he coupled this character with the Calaveritas Literaria poems. So we've got all of this blending in. And you also have to consider around that time that as Mexico City grew, the cemeteries were moved to the outskirts of town. So moving the remains in a respectful way entails a religious procession. And with time, religious processions and visiting graves became part of celebrating the dearly departed. So after that, going back to the 1930s, during the tenure of President Cárdenas, his government enlisted the elite intellectuals in forging, as I said, a new national identity that glorified our indigenous past and creating this sense of pride in being mestizo and being mixed race, So basically, him and his government and the intellectuals were the ones that created the myth that we inherited these Dia de Muertos traditions from the glorious Mesoamericans. But note this, that their focus was on glorifying an ancient culture that no longer existed. Nobody cared about the about the cultures of the 63 indigenous groups that exists in Mexico. Those they wanted to ignore. It's the past that counts, not the present, right? And they sanitized the whole thing and they homogenized it by adding the religious veneer of Catholicism. So you put the whole thing together, the ancient Romans and the medieval Catholics and the Calaveritas Literarias and the Catrina from Posadas and the cemeteries and processions and Cárdenas' work with the elite, and you've got the other Muertos. And now you add another layer because you got the James Bond inspired parade that didn't exist before, right? So all of this comes together, and you have to think about it, that this was done with the modernist ideology of the 30s, right? And they made it pass as if it were an ancient tradition. It's not. And Dr. Elsa Malvido, who discovered all of this, she worked 30, 40 years trying to bring all of this knowledge to the national conscious. She did workshops, she did interviews. No one knows about it. Like, you have to start researching it to come across it. Like, everyone still goes with the idea that, oh, this is a Mesoamerican thing. It's still taught in our schools with that nationalist veneer of this is us. No one is speaking about the truth. So it's interesting. And now, how can we turn all of this into our humanistic celebrations for Yom Kippur? I can tell you from experience, the majority of Mexicans believe in cultural appreciation. Most of us would be honored that people from other cultures celebrated something of our customs, as long as they're respected and they're not botched. We will laugh at people who botch our costumes, basically. So if you feel so inclined, you're welcome to make a Dia de Muertos altar suited to your own humanistic and spiritual worldview. And basically, that's it. Feel free to make an altar, share it with us on Facebook. Enjoy it. So I still have a little bit of time left. So how about a Q&A? How do I stop sharing? There we go.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly jump in to thank you. That was a brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
And it contributed to the richness of our community.
Thank you. Thank you.
I thought those were so beautiful.
They are.
I had no idea all this. I just knew that people had picnics on their graves of their ancestors,
Yes.
and I didn't understand that, and it makes so much more sense now after you explained it. It's also interesting that it's such a modern phenomenon.
I know, right? It's 100 years old.
That. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, the whole concept of how these things develop. I mean, you want to look into other things too. How did they end the way they are, I mean,
Well,
that's fascinating.
I'm thinking of Thanksgiving here in the US and the whole, I mean, it's kind of like, it's not unusual, it's highly usual of people in positions of power creating and recreating, trying to strengthen identity through inventing traditions. And I mean, you can talk about Israel and stuff like that, and how they Jewish people have used the Bible to forge a common past that is mythical in a way. And I was thinking of Thanksgiving, the idea, oh, let's unite all the country, thinking about what happened. Well, none of that happened. And American Indians, what they feel is insulted by it because it paints them as the naive people that gave them food and then afterwards got killed. Although that's not mentioned in the thing, but it's the one feast that is, except for the American Indians, that is celebrated across all religions. So it's really impressive. I'm flabbergasted. But and also beautiful. It's a beautiful facility. I had in my head was Coco and
Yes.
Book of Life and stuff like that. But this is a whole another level. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to add that in southern Italy, there is, so my mom's family are from there, and there is a festival called Umorto, which is El Muerto, the death. And it's celebrated in the Roman Catholic communities. And what they do is the night before, which is on the same day, by the way, the night before they go to the graves of their grandparents or great-grandparents, whoever it is that passed away. And they, kids write a wish for a gift that they want. And they have to say to, they have to light a candle and they have to say to their ancestors this rhyme that basically means, it goes, Armi Santi, holy souls, Ius uno e vostri sisti tanti. I am one and you are many. Mentris uniuntus mundu riwai. While I'm in this world of woe, cose rimuoti mettimini assai. So things from the dead, give me many. And then in the morning, you make like marzipan sweets and little biscuits that are that mean bone biscuits. They look like bones. So you mentioned bones. And there's literally like an altar with the photos of the people that have died and these things on them. And it's very, very similar. And because I'm from this mixed family, you know, I'm Sicilian and Jewish, etc. I do like a version of humor to myself. I've never combined it into Yom Kippur, but this year I started thinking about maybe I should.
Yeah, it's actually thanks to that celebration you mentioned that Dr. Elsa Malvido realized that this was a very ancient costume and it was Catholic and it came from Italy and from ancient Romans. It was not a Mesoamerican thing because she, you know, she discovered what you mentioned in her travels.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah,
Speaking
this
of the
was
soul cakes,
I'm sorry, what?
You've got Don and Gabrielle trying to.
no, I was just going to mention that in Halloween, uh, uh, the European Halloween, there's the giving of soul cakes. And they are kind of like little some biscuits, not in the British sense, but more in the kind of like scones, but with a cross on them, and that was part of the things that we're giving there. And there's a song called Soul Cakes. It's sung by Peter, Paul, and Mary, but also by Sting, that relate to that, how the people went from house to house asking for for something. Give me something. Give me a penny. Give me an apple, a pear, whatever. And if not, well, God bless you. But also soul cakes. Why don't you give me a soul cake? So
Fascinating how different cultures have similar ideas and around similar dates.
you know, and this probably goes into what, Martin, you're going to do in Nizkor. But just occurs to me that in my tradition, that Nizkor, they would tell the congregation, okay, this is for people who are remembering their dead. So if you don't want to, actually, at one point I can remember they said, okay, everybody who isn't, you should leave. And later on they said, if you want to, you can stay, but we don't really need you to. And that is a completely different approach to your, you know, your honored dead. My parents wouldn't let me go on Shiva when I was a child. It's too sad. So it's a very, very different cultural approach to your dead ancestors.
Zyanya, I noticed in the pictures that you shared of yours,
Yes,
that there were 2 candles and bread.
I know, right?
Right. And I think the similarity there is obvious, right?
Yes, it wasn't conscious. Maybe it was my unconscious popping and saying something there.
Yeah. But I wondered that perhaps a way to incorporate it would be to make a challah for our ancestors, give them a glass of Kiddush wine, and we already light a candle. So
Yeah, I mean, you could do like a challah bread of the dead kind of like a hybrid thing. All you would need, the secret to bread of the dead, to pan de muerto, is orange essence. Orange essence and sugar. That's what makes Bread of the Dead special. So, just make an orange essence sugary challah, and you got a perfect hybrid.
Right. And we also we say when we're referencing someone that's died in Ladino and Hakitiya, there's a way to say el descansado de mi padre or de mi tío, el descansado, the resting. It's hard to say it in English, but I don't know why I mentioned that, but yeah,
It's
because I wrote
beautiful. It's more
Alá
like
de
it's
los
not
muertos.
dead. It's like resting. It's a little bit softer on the mind.
Yeah,
Right?
but Día de los Descansados. Yeah.
I like it. I like it.
Do people have any questions?
I just have one comment. This was so unexpected and so interesting and so thought-provoking about customs. And I have to tell you, Zyanya, usually I have observed a yard site for a year or two, and then I switched to birthdays because I don't want to remember that my memory be that last difficult weeks or months before death. I want to remember a time when people were together and happy. And this kind of reminded, although I don't literally make a cake, I was a very good baker. So I guess I'm remembering, that symbolically the cake is there. So Zyanya, thank you for this presentation. It was wonderful.
You're welcome, and thank you. And well, yes, you're welcome to incorporate that into your beliefs and your practice. Death is always sad, but you can also see the happy part of it as a family reunion, and derive happiness and nostalgia from that. That's what we usually do in family dinners at the Day of the Dead. We tell stories about the people who are no longer with us, but not from a sad point of view, but from a happy point of view. So I got to hear stories from my great-great-grandparents, from my grandparents, from my great-grandparents, from my grandparents, from my parents. So, it's also it's generational memory, what we do in Day of the Dead with dinner. So I hope that can help as well.
I like the idea of commemorating the individual on their birthday because, I don't
That's
like
what
the
I
yard
do.
site idea on the day of death. But then you could combine that with the one day a year when you, in general, honor the dead, those who have died as a group. I kind of like those two things mixed together. With the individual on the birthday and the group on one day when everyone gets together and remembers them. I like that.
Well, on the birthday, I tend to think of what I remember most, what we shared, what I shared with that person.
Yeah.
And then I think about like the kind of music my grandmother played on the piano or, and I just,
Yeah.
I do birthdays. We've never burned yard side candles or anything.
On the day that they died, yeah.
Yeah, on the day. We remember the day
We remember
they
them
died,
on their
but
we remember their birthdays, yeah.
but we
And honor them then.
do birthdays.
I'm posting in the chat because there's the Kohenet that lives here who co-organized a Dia de los Muertos Seder, where people sat around, they brought something that was connected to a person that they loved that had died, and they told stories about them in a Seder ritual. And I think that's the link. I think that link talks about it. Yeah.